promised.
Let me interrupt that. Sorry to take you live now to Canberra. We're hearing here from the Shadow Treasurer and the Shadow Finance Minister giving the opposition's response to the federal government's mid-year budget update.
More mortgage pain, more inflation pain for all Australians. They were the features of the budget. Let me take them piece by piece. The average Australian household has seen a 27% increase in their income tax payments since Labor came to power, a 27% increase. Indeed, we've got the highest tax to GDP ratio we've seen for many years, much higher than any time under the previous coalition government. We see more spend in this statement. $209 billion of extra spending since Labor came to power. That's $22,000 of extra spending per household. They're the numbers, $22,000 of extra spending per household. Don't believe the spin from the Treasurer. This is a big spending government. And we certainly see more people in this statement. The government is trying to spin that immigration is coming down. We've seen this week an extra 130,000 people planned in the coming years. It's gone up to over 1.6 million now from 1.5 million in the budget. And the problem here is this. Australia is a proud immigrant nation. There's no question about that. But you've got to get the balance right between the number of people and the spend on infrastructure, the services that are required. And right now, Australians understand that that balance is wrong. We're out of whack. It is simply not working. And of course, as I said, the other M, more mortgage pain, more inflation. That's what you get from a government that delivers these policies. Now, we are seeing that on the ground. We are absolutely at the back of the pack in dealing with these issues. We've got inflation, which is amongst the highest level of any advanced country in the world. We've got inflation, which is entrenched, the most entrenched in the world, according to The Economist. We've got long-term interest rates that are higher than almost every other advanced country in the world. We've seen household disposable income fall in real terms more than any other advanced country in the world. And we have a GDP per person recession. Our economy is in tatters after 18 months of government. That is the situation. There is absolutely nothing this MYEFO is going to do to address that situation. Now, the Treasurer and Finance Minister talked about the government's budget. Well, the one budget they ignored talking about was the household budget. And the household budget is in tatters. We've seen interest costs tripling since Labor came to power. We've seen, as I said, 27% increase in income taxes paid by households, and household disposable income down by 8.6% in the last 18 months. Australians are in pain as they approach Christmas. Enormous financial pain. This should be a joyful time of year, but it's a tough time of year. The Treasurer began the year with a 6,000-word statement on remaking capitalism. All we've seen from him since then is statements, slogans and spin. But we're not seeing what we really need, which is measures taken to get to the source of the problem here, which is to take pressure off inflation, take pressure off interest rates, and in the process, take pressure off hard-working Australian families who are doing it tough. On that note, I'll ask Jane to make some comments.
Thanks, Angus. Well, it's going to be a very tough Christmas for a lot of Australian families, and that's because this is a government that clearly has the wrong priorities. This has been a high-tax, high-spend budget, and that's been confirmed in MYEFO today. As Angus mentioned, $379 billion more in taxes and $209 billion more in spending since this government came to power, and nothing has been done to reduce inflation by pulling the fiscal levers at this government's disposal. In fact, MYEFO confirmed today that inflation is going to remain higher for longer. Let's be very, very clear. The government is asking you to pat them on the back for not spending money, not spending revenue that they weren't expecting and that there was no policy to create. They're telling you that they have saved and reprioritised. Well, a saving is not a saving if you're spending it on something else. Reprioritisations is simply a fancy way of saying we've spent the money on something else. And those reprioritisations have already been announced as part of Catherine King's infrastructure cuts. Quite frankly, if you are reprioritising taxpayer money towards infrastructure that hasn't had the productivity lens put over it on something like the suburban rail loop, which, as we know, is a boondoggle investment that could go well out of control, that the Victorian government has now committed Victorian taxpayers to, and all taxpayers around the country, with the $2.2 billion that has been committed by this government. If that is considered productive infrastructure investment, well, I've got some swamplands that I'd like to sell you to. Savings are not savings if you spend them elsewhere. The NDIS was the biggest saving identified in the budget back in May, taking it from a 14% growth in expenditure to 8%, and yet there was not a single policy that backed up what was essentially a spending cap. In this MYEFO, we know from National Cabinet meetings that there is going to be additional money spent to the states, given to the states, to compensate them for the NDIS spending cap. And yet in this MYEFO, we've seen that shoved into measures that we can't yet announce. Now, that's a nonsense. That's hiding the increased expenditure of this government. That NDIS is not a saving. It's not a saving. It's still out of control. Australians are facing a really tough Christmas. They're going to have to make some big decisions about their own family budgets. It's a real shame that this Labor government has failed to make decisions, those tough decisions around theirs.